Off we go. Hello, everybody. All right. All right. So thanks so much for joining, everybody. Really good to have you all here. This is the series of webinars that ProdPad runs. If you want to check out the other webinars that we've run in the past, head to prodpad.com/webinars. We've got a bunch of these past talks recorded. It's a mix of presentations and firesides. Today is going to be a fireside. It's going to be a chat. So I do have a fire here for us, which is going to be warming and wonderful. And it's always from just a mix of amazing experts with excellent product insights. And it's always with a focus on the content and learning and sharing and getting a chance to ask questions and answer those questions. So today is going to be recorded and shared with you all, and you will have a chance to ask questions. So feel free to use the chat to each other and chat to us. And there is a Q&A module as well that you can use to keep your questions a little bit more organized, and we'll try to get to them all as much as possible. Jump in there, ask your questions, and we look forward to chatting with you all. A little bit of an intro before we get started. So I just want to tell you a little bit about ProdPad. So it was originally a tool that was built by myself and my co-founder from Mind the Product, Simon, when we were both product managers ourselves. We were both based up in London. We're managing product teams there, and we needed tools to do our own jobs, and nothing existed. So we needed something to help keep track of the experiments we were running, that we're doing to try to hit our business objectives and try to solve our customers' problems, and something to help keep tabs on the ideas and feedback that made up our backlog. So building ProdPad gave us control and organization and transparency. And so it wasn't long before we shared it with other product people around us. And today it's used by thousands of teams around the world. So it's free to try, and we even have a sandbox mode, which is brand new. And it's essentially a version of ProdPad where you can see example product management data, where you can see how things like lean roadmaps, OKRs, ideas and experiments and customer feedback, and how everything else sort of fits together in a product management space. And our team itself is made up of product people. So start a trial today, and then get in touch and let us know how you like it. Let us know your feedback. We live off this stuff. We'd love to hear it. Now, on that note, let's kick off our fireside. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to our special guest today. For the uninitiated, this is our special guest, Kate Leto. She has a wealth of experience. She's got more than 25 years experience in product management, marketing, org design, and she's taken on all sorts of roles in organizations of all different shapes and sizes as a consultant, a coach, advisor, and also her first book, it's called Hiring Product Managers, Using Product EQ to Go Beyond Culture and Skills, has just recently been released, and you can get it, it's been released by Sense and Respond Press, so you can pick that up now. I'm gonna have a link for that at the end of this as well. And Kate and I actually go way back, probably about 10, maybe 11 years now, I don't know. You were one of the first product people that I came across when I moved here, back to the early days of Mind the Product and Product Tank. We even got the chance to co-teach product management classes together, which was, brilliant. So everyone, everyone give Kate a huge, warm welcome in the chat.
Hello, everyone.
Now, Kate has got a really fascinating way to think about what sets one company apart from others. Now, so while many others think about the tactics or the brand or positioning, Kate boils it down to something much deeper and human-based. This is what sets companies apart. She says that it's the people behind it all, the way they think, the way they communicate and relate to each other, the way they handle the tough times, the way they make decisions and turn up. And that might seem intangible and kind of fluffy, but Kate's got this nailed as something that you can measure and iterate upon and improve over time, just like you improve in facets of your product. So, Kate, can you give us some background on how you came to realize all of this?
Sure. Thanks again for having me, Janna. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah,
and
wonderful.
Here with all of you, albeit virtually. Yeah, so as you've said, I've been involved in product management for quite some time, and I think we must have met, I think 2009, 2010, something like that, in the Old Street area in London, as we were all working on startups and trying to be the next big thing. And I continued on working on product management after I left the startup there. I was working at a startup called Moo.com, for those of you that might know the business cards and the mini cards and things like that that Moo produces. And after that, I left to kind of go do my own thing, and I started consulting kind of by accident, kind of just to pay the bills. But it turned into something that has been really interesting and enjoyable and challenging for me over the last 10 years now. And a few years ago, I started to move slightly outside the product world into more kind of transformation work, as a lot of big organizations wanted to start to work like startups. They wanted to understand, how do you do iterative working? How do you do, agile, be it a big A or a small A, and things like that. So that took me into a slightly different space. And from that, I started to think more about this idea of coaching and actually working with people more on what I call human skills. So things around like self-awareness and resilience and leadership and collaboration and influence and all these really cool things. So a few years back now, I went and took a coaching course. And it was a business coaching course as well as for personal coaching. And I came out of that and started going back into my product work. And I was just looking around, at everything that's being written about in our community on Mind the Product and other sites, and realized that we're also focused on kind of what I call our technical skills, things like, how to build a great roadmap, and what tools and techniques to use, or how to build an MVP and what is an MVP, or how to do testing at multivariate or AB or whatever it might be, how to do a design sprint even. I realized that we were just so amazingly like laser focused on those things, which was cool. That's like essential parts of what we do, but we weren't really talking about how you do that work, right? And that, in my mind, is where the human skills come in. So I started blogging and thinking and talking about this concept that I called product EQ. I still call it product EQ. It's still around, thankfully. And that's really a focus on bringing human skills and emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and all these other things I've been talking about into our product work, and realizing that in order to be, good product practitioners, we need to have a balance between our technical skills and our human skills. And that's really what's going to get us further in terms of our career and also our products further along. So that's what I've been focusing on, is this concept of product EQ and applying it to different areas of the way we work. And sometimes it's individual coaching, or sometimes it's working with teams. And sometimes it's working with organizations overall to build up kind of these human skills in different ways.
Yeah, it's really fascinating work, because it's so different than what so many other people were talking about, and what the focus is. And I think, you're right. A lot of the stuff that people were focusing on then was healthy and was good. It was bringing the product management space forward. But I think it's essential that we start really thinking about the stuff that's underlying and that actually does make a huge difference for businesses. And what I've really found interesting about your work is how much product EQ does impact the business.
Yeah.
You've made some interesting points about how much conflict management plays into how well a business can operate, or how well companies who have good EQ, how they outperform other ones, for example.
Right.
And it's just stuff that companies don't typically think about, and yet it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research out there about how, having organizations with self-awareness and teams with self-awareness, and teams and organizations can have levels of self-awareness, which might blow people's minds, like right there. Right. But organizations and teams with higher self-awareness are higher performing.
Right.
And their rate of return is higher. So that you can connect these different EQ competencies directly to higher performance levels. Which is, especially when I first started writing about it, is I really wanted to make that connection, because I wanted people to take it seriously.
Yeah.
That this isn't just kind of airy fairy and fluffy stuff. This really will make a difference on your bottom line.
Yeah.
as an organization, and of course personally as well. There's research that shows that individuals with higher levels of EQ tend to make more money every year. They have a higher level of salary than those with lower levels of EQ in the same role. I
Oh.
think it equated to something like $1,300 per EQ point.
Right.
Like
Okay.
there's that research out there, which is just kind of mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a lot of research that just shows a direct connection. And if we focus on our human skills, and if we focus on building like self-awareness and influence and resilience, organizational awareness, our conflict resolution skills, it's going to have an impact on not just us personally, which is a good thing, right? But those around us and the organization overall.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really important stuff. I mean, it's affecting our salaries. It's affecting our ability to hire the right people. It's affecting our business's bottom line. So how do we go about measuring this stuff and understanding whether we have it or don't, obviously?
Yeah. So there's so many, if we focus on emotional intelligence, there's so many tools out there that you can find and do online as an individual or a team or part of an organization. I've also started to create some of my own tools that people can use on their own to start to understand things, for themselves or with their teams. So I've got a few different things on my website with explanations on how to understand overall, like what is your product EQ like? And how can we talk about like forming a balanced product practice, which a product practice, as I talk about in the book, is just this understanding that the work we do as product people has two parts: technical skills and human skills. And our goal is to get them in balance.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yes. So now that you mentioned that, I've actually pulled out some of the interesting tools that you had, because I found these fascinating. And I always find it really interesting or really practical and useful when you have tools like this that you can take away and use to measure yourself or measure your organization or things like that. So I wanted to make sure that these were shared with everybody today. Could you talk us through some of these canvases?
Sure. Totally. So this is the product practice canvas. And as I just said, the idea of a product practice in my magic mind is the ability to focus on kind of what we do, which are technical skills, like our product roadmap frameworks, our strategy frameworks, our vision statements, all of those really good tools that help us do what we do and figure out what we do. And then there's the human skill side as well. And the human skills, as I mentioned, are things like leadership and resilience and self-awareness and organizational awareness, conflict resolution, all of these really cool, essential skills that we need for the work that we do. So the goal, if we can have one, is to get these two sides in balance and not over focus on one over the other. So with this canvas, the idea is it's something you could use on your own, or it's something you could use if you're doing maybe some peer coaching with a friend, or if you're actually a coach yourself and you want to use this with a client, or if you're a manager and want to kind of use this to frame your organization overall and to think in general, how's the group doing, you could use it for that as well. What you start out with is in the upper left-hand side, the current state. So it's just basically asking, where are you now? And asking you to identify on a scale of 1 to 10 for human skills, just in general. I haven't broken them down, but you could do that if you'd like to. Say in general, where are you on this scale from 1 to 10? And then the same with technical skills. And then going back to basically then it's identifying, let's say if human skills, you give yourself a 6. What's your goal? Where would you like to be? You don't have to be at 10, right? That would probably be impossible. And while we're all overachievers and would like to be a 10 in everything, we have to be realistic. So it's kind of, what's your satisfactory level? Do you want to get up to a 7? A lot of times it's best and easiest to make progress just by going to one next step. So let's say you're 6 and you'd like to get to a 7 on human skills. So what's holding you back from doing that? How do you make a change to actually boost your level of human skills in that instance? If what's holding you back could be something like your organization isn't really focused on human skills. Your team doesn't really talk about it. There's no way for you to learn more about human skills. And then also the next box is what's working with you. So maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you have a team that's really into this, and you're doing a lot of work around it. Or maybe you've started working with a coach and they can help you and they're helping you along. Or maybe you do have like a peer coach or mentor that you're working with and you guys can work on this together. But the two questions on the right-hand side are called often a force field framework. So what's holding you back and what's pushing you forward? So it's kind of identifying those two sides. And then the final box at the bottom is what small steps, what small changes could you make to actually help get your 6 to a 7? So for example, if you'd like to work on self-awareness as one of your key human skills, could you say that within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to go talk to 5 different members of my team and get some feedback, and that's a practice I'm going to continue to do for the next month. And then I'll come back and take a look at and run through this again and see what my progress is like. If it's stakeholder management, influence, that type of skill that you'd like to work with, could you set up meetings with 3 really challenging stakeholders in the next few weeks and really understand what their challenges are and maybe start to map out a plan on how you can build influence with those stakeholders.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the overview of the canvas.
Okay, those are really good examples as well. I love anything that breaks things down to small, actionable next steps, because so often self-improvement is so difficult to wrap your head around. It's like, well, how do you move from one stage to the next? Now, is this something that you do for, all of your skills all at once, or do you focus in on one saying, I want to improve my conflict management, and you do one canvas per thing?
Yeah, it would be ideal if you could do one at a time. And some of the other tools that we use might help kind of lead into this conversation. But sometimes just to get like the journey started and get the dialogue moving, I have used this as just kind of a big overall framework of like, all right, where are we? Right?
Yeah. Right.
Taking into account, we've got all of these human skills and all these technical skills. How are we feeling about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's actually the value of a canvas. I've always liked the format of a canvas because it's essentially a one-pager that outlines the type of questions you should be asking about this object. And just by laying out these assumptions, it sort of gets your mind thinking about things and allows you to say, oh, well, maybe I should also think about this or lay out this other thing as well. So even if you don't necessarily fill out everything, it gets your mind thinking about it and helps you understand where the blanks are.
Yeah, it's putting something into action, right? As a lot of the things that I focus on is trying to find ways that people can learn by doing instead of just talking. So this is it's something to do, right? That can start to get the brain going. And just like any canvas that we've worked on, it's a conversation piece, and it's iterative. It's not meant to be set in stone. It's very dynamic. Yeah. So that's why you come back and look at it again on a regular basis. You share it with your team members if you'd like to. You share it with your boss if you'd like to. But it's something to just kind of to kick off the work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really good because I mean, you talk about self-awareness being one of the facets of human skills, and it's one of these difficult ones to pin down because how do you know if you're self-aware and how do you improve that, right? And you wrote this really fascinating article for Mind the Product. You've actually done a series of articles for Mind the Product under the product EQ category, and this one that you wrote for Mind the Product on self-awareness talks about how the stat was 95% of people think they're self-aware, but the real number is actually closer to 10 to 15%.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So you've kind of got this catch there, right? So the people who think that they are aware, that they know that they're self-aware, actually aren't. And so this type of exercise feels like the type of thing that would lay out these assumptions and maybe help them become more aware of these gaps that they might have.
Yeah, a lot of the things that I've I have on my website and the tools that I've created is to help build self-awareness, because self-awareness is like the meta skill, right?
Right.
It's just kind of like, it's a good place to start because you can build on it. And it's essential because it's one of those skills that, or it's one of those competencies that helps us understand what we're good at and what we're not good at. And then because of that, we do a better job at kind of at making decisions, you know, and identifying choices and options and being honest about them to ourselves. So yeah, a lot of the things that I've developed is just help to build self-reflection and self-awareness.
Right. Yeah. And so how does the product practice canvas relate to the other couple of tools that you have? Because I know you have the role canvas and the product EQ canvas.
So the role canvas is actually something a bit different that I built out as I was working with clients on hiring. So it's more specific to a hiring scenario, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just about hiring. So in my book, I talk quite a bit about the role canvas as a way to create alignment with your team on what you're actually looking for from a role before you build a job description, and definitely before you start interviewing. Because what I talk about in the book and what I've seen, and I bet you've seen this as well, is, you know, when you get a new headcount, everybody just gets super excited and just goes out and like copies and pastes and puts together this Frankenstein job description and then puts it out there. And then you wonder why maybe the hiring doesn't work out, you know?
Yeah.
Because we haven't really started from a place of consideration for what really are we looking for from this role. So within the role canvas, there are 4 questions, and they're seemingly very simple, but they cause a lot of debate and discussion, which is the idea. And the first question is, what's the purpose of the role? So this goes beyond like the job title to actually, what's the purpose? What's the reason for being? Why are you actually bringing this person in, right? And then what are the accountabilities? What are the outcomes they're going to be working for? What's the role responsible? And sometimes it's hard to identify that up front, you know, and as a team. So sometimes I say to start that conversation, start with, what is this role not accountable for? and work at it that way. And then below I have human skills and technical skills. So what human skills and technical skills are going to be essential for this role to actually achieve their accountabilities and their higher and its higher purpose. So one of the other interesting things I see here is, of course, teams don't really have a hard time identifying the technical skills I think people will need. But the human skills, this is another opportunity to actually learn about human skills. Because in the beginning, when I do this with clients, they'd all just start out by writing emotional intelligence. And as I've talked about so far, you know, there's a lot of different competencies within emotional intelligence. There's self-awareness, there's org awareness, there's conflict resolution, there's leadership, there's all this great stuff. So this is the time to really break down what you're looking for from human skills and get to understand it yourself, and then list it, prioritize it, you know, and align on it as a team for what are you really looking for here. So that's the role canvas. A lot of times I've seen individual hiring managers maybe start a draft of this and then bring it to the team, or in our virtual world these days, folks can go and download a copy of the role canvas and then work on it in a workshop with everybody else on the team, with the recruiter, if there's a recruiter involved, with managers. It's more of an alignment session versus just, you know, let somebody go in the back and put together a job description kind of thing. I've also seen people use it as a way to kind of reflect on their own role. So again, self-reflection and building self-awareness. So using this to kind of outline, what am I doing?
Right, yeah.
What's my purpose? What are my accountabilities? What are my skills? And then actually bringing that to a conversation with your manager, you know, and have, you know, to get aligned there. Are we on the same page with why I'm here and what I'm working on? Or with your team? And if you have every member of your team do this for their own role, you'll immediately begin to see some gaps, you know, and some areas of overlap. Like maybe you'll have 2 people with thinking they have the same purpose or the same accountabilities. So it's kind of an all-rounder, I suppose.
Yeah, I can definitely see the value in getting everybody involved with this sort of thing. We have something at ProdPad with our own roles that draws on that purpose question. We obviously did it before we saw the role canvas, which I think is brilliant. But we asked a question, which is, why is this job important?
Right.
And another one is, what are you going to learn on this job? Or what are you going to learn in this role? But we found that after we did that, the number of applications and the application quality went up. So by being able to articulate that up front, we actually managed to get better applications out of it, which was really great. But it also forced us to think about what it is that we actually really wanted out of the role and why it should exist. But I like that it takes this that step further. What outcome is this role responsible for, and what should this person be made up of? Not just what they're technically good at, but what should this person be good at?
Right. Exactly. What's missing from our team?
Yeah.
So, what do we need from this role?
Yeah. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, organizations are, built on the strength of the people. Right? It doesn't matter so much about the different skills or the different technical skills, because those are things that can be trained into people.
Right.
The makeup of the team, the strength of the team is based on how the people interact with each other. And, fundamentally, if you don't have a good mix of people with good EQ, your team is going to suffer and fail. So it is really important to be able to outline this stuff and make sure you've got a good mix and identify that if you don't have a good mix.
Yeah, for sure. I've worked with a few teams that have had some conflict issues, that they've dealt with. Maybe, amongst the team or even with stakeholders, challenging stakeholders, things like that. And so they've actually started considering and interviewing for conflict resolution skills.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like, I'm just thrilled with. I'm like,
yeah. Now, is that something that can be learned and, picked up like a technical skill?
Yeah, any of these human skills can be learned. They can grow. It takes time and it takes commitment and it takes focus. It's a different part of your brain than what learns our technical skills.
Yeah.
So we basically have to, identify what we want to change, the behavior. It's a behavior change, kind of like building a new habit. So you have to unlearn that existing habit and then repeatedly do the habit that build the habit that you like until it becomes more part of your reaction. A lot of times it won't be natural, but you'll be able to identify it and create some space between action and reaction to get to the space to get to kind of that level of more familiarity and comfortable with competency than maybe what you had before. So yeah, it's totally possible. It just takes practice and it takes some discipline and commitment.
Yeah.
But it's totally there.
Does it take a special kind of organization to accept that sort of learning, to create that space for people to do so?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and I've been lucky. Either I'm working more with organizations who are open to that, or just the population in general is getting bigger. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think, over the last few years, it's grown by leaps and bounds, and not every organization is more aware and more hip to this. Some of them are very much in survival mode still, because of the pandemic, and they put this type of thinking and learning more on the back burner. But others have seen that this is actually a way through the survival phase. So I'm very encouraged by it in the direction that companies are kind of willing to explore it now. Companies of all sizes and shapes, actually, which is cool.
Well, fundamentally, it's something that should make them stronger in the long run. I mean, this is speaking to diversity of your team, or the ability to build diversity of your team, whether that's from different backgrounds or neurodiversity, really.
Yeah. It's a really good topic. And Jason and I talked about that on his podcast the other day that just came out today, just as a little plug.
Excellent.
So yeah, the diversity in teams, of course. And in the book, I talk about, gender diversity and ethnic diversity and different areas of diversity that, again, have been measured and that we can see in terms of high performing teams have greater levels of diversity, be it acquired or more authentic diversity that comes into these organizations. But also, the point of that Jason and I talked about the other day, and you're alluding to as well, is neurodiversity. So different ways of thinking, be it somebody who's more on an autistic spectrum, maybe has an anxiety disorder. Everybody's brain has something wonderful to offer. So it's finding the way to bring that into the team and bring that into the organization so that everybody can really do their best work.
Yeah.
So lots of interesting stuff going on with all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other, I guess it's not a canvas so much, it's the wheel that you've developed that I wanted to take a peek at, because this is the one, let me see if I can find it here. Is it this one? There we go. This is the product EQ wheel or canvas, as you call it. Can you talk us through where this one goes?
Yeah, for sure. So this is based off of a coaching framework called the Wheel of Life. And it's nice because you can put you can use it in just a million different ways. So the way I'm using it here today is looking at the different, what I think are kind of the core human skills competencies for product management. And I've named them as self-awareness, resilience, self-control, emotional self-control, adaptability, empathy, influence, communication, collaboration. However, I also have a version of the wheel that's blank, so you can put whatever you'd like in there in terms of human skills. What you do is basically, there's definitions of each of these different competencies on my website that you can go check out and make sure you feel kind of good and comfortable with what each of these means. Is you start to draw, as you'll see on the canvas, there's a 0 in the middle and then a 5 and then a 10. So you draw basically on a scale from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, where you think you are, what your level is for each different competency. So resilience, you could say I'm a 6 in resilience. Self-control, maybe you're a 3. Adaptability, maybe you're a 7. So you go around and kind of give a number for each of the different areas and then draw a line that connects those different points. And that helps you identify maybe some of the areas that you'd want to focus on, as well as some of the areas that are bright spots. So you're doing really well. And then you use this, it is another self-reflection tool to identify areas you want to focus on and then say, okay, let's say if self-control, I'm a 6 and I want to get to a 7, how can I do that? So it's another way into that conversation. And actually to kind of start to build out a habit of doing small things to make change in these different human skills areas.
What I love about that, I'll share this one as well, because you've actually turned this into a Miro board as well.
Yes, exactly. So people can go play with it.
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of my work on Miro and just being able to map things out and play with it and be able to reflect on it as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And if anybody ends up using it and wants to edit it, just ping me and I'll give you access.
Excellent. So interesting to talk about some of these what sort of comes out of these things. I mean, your book is about specifically like hiring for product EQ. Like why and how does a company go about understanding someone's product EQ from the outside and identifying that when they're actually hiring someone?
Yeah.
And, how does that make a difference?
So how they do it, I talk about a few different things that you can do as part of your hiring process. And one of them is actually rethinking how you think about the questions that you ask in hiring, ask in interviews. So, I remember when I was, young and working at, these different startups and organizations and interviewing people, I'd like 5 minutes before the interview, I'd go online and get a couple of those brain teasers from Google, that Google would ask in interviews, or Amazon or Microsoft or whoever it might be. And I'd kind of rock up into my interview thinking I'm all cool because I got some good brain teasers to throw at them. And I've learned that kind of gets you nowhere.
Right. Yeah.
So what I talk about is this concept of behavior-based interview questions, which are really simple questions, not meant to throw people off, but ask people about behaviors. So how they behaved in a past work experience and how maybe that might have impacted other people. And if the opportunity comes up, if they behave the same way, to get a good understanding of how people are viewing a positive behavior, maybe a negative behavior, and even an opportunity for change. And there's a really good book that I talk about in my own book with questions specifically around EQ, different competencies, like questions that can focus on self-awareness, questions that focus on conflict resolution or leadership skills and things like that. And they're really simplistic questions. Like for a conflict resolution, you could ask, when's the last time that somebody at work disagreed with you? And how did you handle it? What was your reaction? These are like really simple questions. And they're not meant to throw people off, but what happens, hopefully, is the candidate will actually share their story, and it will be a story. It'll be a narrative about what happened, why it happened, how they reacted, how they react differently. And it's kind of up to the interviewer at that point to kind of nudge and probe until they make something like conflict resolution, which seems so untangible, tangible.
Right.
You find out things like, how do they engage with conflict, or they just walk away, and if they do engage, how do they engage? They want people to feel like everybody's a winner, or they want like a winner and a loser. So there's a lot we can do to, once we've identified in the role canvas, what are the priorities for our human skills, to actually interview for those human skills, and build up a better understanding of the candidate's kind of access to those skills as part of the hiring process.
Yeah, that's really powerful stuff and really practical stuff as well. Because I know, I've been guilty of those brain teaser things on both sides as well. I remember studying for interviews by learning all the brain teaser questions, and all it gets you are people who are good at brain teasers.
Right.
Whereas if you're able to ask people how they behaved, past experiences with things, you'll actually get a good sense of how they are likely to behave in future situations.
Yeah, we have to be somewhat careful because, as we've talked about already, people can change behavior. Yeah. So that's where I think it's important to see how would this person want to behave differently next time around? Can they express that willingness to change? That's something interesting. And I think the other part of all of it is, I think we have to realize that as we're trying to hire for these skills, we can't really see these skills unless we have it ourselves.
Right.
It's like one of those things, like you can't see it unless you got it. So that means, as part of hiring for human skills, we need to work on our own.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So do you think that means the hiring team needs to be made up of a particular mix of people?
I think it's just, ideally, it's the hiring team is made up with people who understand what self-awareness is, and maybe are working on growing their own,
Right.
They've become students of these different areas, and they're trying to learn and grow them. So maybe there's somebody it's kind of really interested in conflict resolution, and so they're focusing on that skill and working towards that, or leadership skills. If it's really interesting that we have, a lot of product leaders out there who, if you ask them what a leader is and what a leadership skill is, you might not, get a great answer. So ideally, the people that are interviewing for these skills have at least a good understanding of what it is,
yeah,
and what they're looking for when they ask these questions.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It actually reminds me of something going back some years with some research that we did for Mind the Product, which was around stakeholder management. We asked everybody as to what some of their biggest challenges were. And as product managers, a lot of people said stakeholder management, right? Which speaks to me as probably some conflict management, some communication issues in there, right? Stakeholder management is it's a big problem, right? People are hard, as I've been known to say, right? And when it came to suggesting things that they could learn about for the workshops and the training that's available, it was stakeholder management wasn't highlighted as one of the top subjects at the time. Because I think people went, well, I could learn this technical skill. If only I learned if only I could code that much better. I could learn how to talk to the developer, or if only I learned how to write copywriting, knew how to write copy that much better, or new design, or whatever else.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see that attitude change. I think people are now realizing that these human skills are much more important, but I think there's probably still a lot more to go to enlighten people at how much impact these things actually do have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting when I think of like our product community, and how it's evolved over even the last decade that we've known each other. Like it's gone from being very focused on our technical skills to starting to move more into this broader human skills area. And it's kind of like that saying, what got you here won't get you there.
Right.
So it's like as a community, we're realizing that like, all right, so we got this, right?
Yeah.
Now, how can we continue to grow these other skills that are going to take us all much higher in organizations, and whatever kind of role we'd like to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Spinning off from that, I've actually got a question from somebody in the audience. So thanks, Ross, for this question. So he's actually asking about how much EQ deficiency impacts the value of the products being developed.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I could bring it back to self-awareness even, because again, self-awareness is like your internal compass in a lot of ways, right? And it does help you understand your own strengths and weaknesses, and actually be able to kind of lead conversations around not just you, but your team and your product as well. I always use the example that, when you're putting together your product roadmap, if you a sign maybe of self-awareness is that you'll be able to raise your hand and say, oh, that thing I'm really pushing for on the roadmap might be in my own best interest, but not the best interest of the team or the product itself. So I think having that self-awareness to help you kind of realize what's best for the product might not be what's best for you, but that's okay. And that's where we get into a lot of ethical questions as well, I think, around product ethics and what should we be pursuing, and how's best to do that. But even things like influence, as you were just saying, stakeholder management influence is one of the biggest challenges we have. So people that are more kind of nuanced and influence and have good communication skills as well hopefully will have a better experience bringing stakeholders along with what you're trying to do with your product. So it's all of these seemingly untangible skills that have real impact on the product that's getting built. Can make it, perhaps it's easier to get out the door. Perhaps it's more aligned with what the customer is wanting versus what the company thinks the customer wants. All of those things can be tied back to some level of human skill.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'd also argue that teams with better EQ are better able to communicate with each other to understand what the problems are, and therefore solve the right problems.
Totally. Yeah. There's this other piece of data that I remember, I think it was in a Harvard Business Review article, that said that teams with higher levels of self-awareness deal with conflicts better, they make decisions better, and they coordinate their work easier. So they were like 30% more or higher performing than teams with lower levels of self-awareness. So it definitely shows up in the quality of the work that you do.
Yeah, so it just makes everything, just sort of greases the wheels, makes everything that much easier.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean there's not going to be tension or conflict. It just means when it comes up, hopefully you're going to be able to deal with it in a good way.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm just seeing that we've got some questions coming in on the chat. And folks, feel free to drop your questions in there or in the Q&A area. I was just looking for questions in the Q&A area. Let me read these questions. Okay, so Andrew says, Are there any big red flags that you look out for when asking about emotional maturity? People who struggle with certain questions or some kind of common misguided answer?
That's a good question. Asking about emotional maturity, even if, I don't know, it'd be interesting to ask, even if you ask that question and see a person's response, they're either going to be comfortable with it or not. You'll notice body language, even virtually when we're doing interviewing now, you'll be able to pick up on some of those things. There are so many different questions. If you want to get into specific areas of human skills or emotional intelligence, there are so many different questions that you can ask to like zero in on those aspects of self-awareness or like emotional self-control or any of the other things I've mentioned. I actually have the book over here, but it's under some things. I recommend buying this book called The EQ Interview by Adele Lynn. You can also pick up some of the questions in my book, but she's broken down everything specifically and can give you some questions and what to look for in response. There's my book. I like
There's
that.
your book. And I bet that you mentioned the other book in your book.
Yes.
There you go.
There's my book. That's a good segue. So there are definitely red flags in terms of interviews. There are red flags in terms of or interview questions and how people respond to that. It's interesting to see even how people would respond to a job description. If you took like your canvas, your role canvas, and did turn that into the job description, which is what I'm encouraging people to do. It'd be interesting to see how people respond even in their CVs to your role canvas, where maybe you're talking about more things like self-awareness or conflict resolution or leadership skills and getting more specific around that. So there will be, I think there's different places throughout your process that you can pick up on red flags.
Yeah. Katie asks a good question. How do you tell an existing employee that they need to improve their EQ?
Well, hopefully you have regular feedback rounds, right? And real-time feedback is key. I would again try to break down what actually as part of their EQ you're talking about, so to get specific as possible, and give examples, just as kind of best practices and giving feedback, and doing it in a way that's more supportive versus accusatory. But really, this is another chance for you, Katie, or whomever on your team to learn more about the competencies so you can better identify like, what is it really that this person needs to work on, and kind of bring that to them. And, maybe help them with some of the different tools we've talked about today, to help kind of identify what is the area they need to work on and like, what's a small step that they can take to start to improve that. So it's a different kind of performance improvement plan.
Yeah, I can imagine taking them on the journey with the first canvas that you showed us, the balance one, could be an interesting way to frame the problem and get them on board with it and start talking about next steps to say, hey, we're at a 6 now. How do we get to a 7?
Look at this. 2 things to talk about, right?
Yeah. I imagine it takes some personal EQ of the person giving the feedback to be able to do so in a kind and considerate way anyways.
Yes.
So that requires some personal growth or personal self-awareness to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Eric asks, do you assess EQ at the product team level or at the versus the individual or product management level?
You could do both. I would definitely do both, because there's a lot of evidence that these different skills do live at a team level, right? And I talk about this in the book as well. The change that you create when you start working on human skills often starts individually, but then as that person becomes more, be it self-aware or resilient or adaptable or innovative or whatever the skill is, it often kind of starts to spread across the team, right? And impacts the team as well. And then the team becomes more involved in the conversations and the work. And then, maybe it goes to another team, so you start to create sometimes I say super spreader events, but we don't want to use that exactly. But it's starting small, starting with the individual a lot of times, going to a team, and then to a second team, a third team. Then eventually, you can start to have a wider impact on an organization. So look at it team, individual level and team level to get going, though, I'd say.
That makes sense. And so you also talked about this concept of organizational awareness. You wrote an article about this one, and you had a tip about walking around the office and doing a tour and getting a feel for the organization and how it ticks and how it works. Yeah. Obviously, we're all remote now.
I know.
Any tips for building organizational awareness in this world?
It's really hard, so the best thing I can mention is continuing to find ways of communicating and keeping in touch with people, albeit remotely. So for some folks, that's continuing to have one-on-ones. Sometimes we're just so worn out by Zoom, though. There's definitely Zoom fatigue. So I can understand that not everybody wants to continue to have sessions to understand, hey, what's everybody up to? I've seen some teams actually start to schedule like 30 minutes downtime during the day so that they can, if they want to go have like a quick Slack chat with somebody, maybe it's actually, instead of having a Zoom call, you can keep in touch with people and check in with people by having walks around the neighborhood. If you can do that. So it does mean getting a bit creative and how you continue to kind of keep in touch on the pulse of the organization. And the pulse has probably changed a lot over the last year as well. So it's an interesting, remote working question on how to keep kind of the beat of the organization going and how to keep your pulse check on that at the same time. And I think it's just trial and error right now, really.
And I guess it just goes to show how important it is for the rest of the EQ measures to be to step up, to be worked on, to make sure that you have self-awareness, to make sure that you're good at communicating, conflict management, because all these things tend to flare up and get worse when you don't have organizational awareness, when you don't have that face-to-face ability.
Absolutely. It's, we're sitting on our own in our home office or a kitchen table, and like all the stories start to build in our head, right? So, the number one thing I would recommend, I guess, is just remember these are stories in your head and you need to make sure if they're real or not. Right. So it's kind of, it's building, I'm writing an article about imposter syndrome, actually. And one of the different ways of trying to kind of get a handle on that is building kind of this muscle and this exercise of, okay, is what I'm saying true, right? Asking yourself that, is this true? If no, what is true? How have I been building this up in my mind? How can I start to kind of break it down? And for organizational awareness, tying into that, I think it's mostly about it's mostly about keeping those lines of communication open one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions from any folks in the audience? Anything in the chat or QA? We got a couple minutes left here. While I have you, I actually just wanted to do a quick shout. I know we have Jason Knight here, and I want to say just a quick shout because there's actually a podcast that's gone out today. It was mentioned earlier, but it's the it was a podcast that Kate Leto did, and they talked about the book that she's just done, and I know that they talked a bit about diversity and neurodiversity, which we touched on a little bit today. That's just gone out today, so if you want to pick up on more of this, then go listen to that. And I also did a podcast with Jason that went live like 2 weeks ago or something like that. I don't know what is time. So a month or so ago, he says. So go check that out as well. And in the meantime, if you do have any burning questions or so, we have a few minutes left, but feel free to reach out to us and, always say hi as well.
Well, yeah, please keep in touch for sure.
We have a question coming out here. Oh, Katie just says that she's excited to read your imposter syndrome article. I am also really excited to read that. I find it a fascinating topic. I find that so many product managers suffer from it. As Martin Erickson says, we are generalists in surrounded by specialists.
Yeah.
And it can be really tough in our area. And, here we are being surrounded by needing not just the technical skills, but also the human skills to move up. And so anything you write that could quell those fears that we have around imposter syndrome, we will absolutely lap up and read. So really look forward to reading that.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to finding the time to finish it.
Right.
That's my challenge right now. But yeah, hopefully
totally
it's done this week.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Kate, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, taking the time to share your tools and your exercises and all your knowledge today. Really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Janna. It's been a lot of fun. Good to see you.
Great catching up with you. Take care.
You
Have
too.
a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.